But I also think
it's a great pleasure to have.
Well, let me just add one thing. I just like to say that the American stake in Hong Kong is very, very large. And our naval ship visits and our commercial presence are key.
That's Jiang Zemin, of course, President Jiang Zemin. Coming in here also with him is Premier Li Peng, a little farther back with the glasses. They arrived, both of them today, together, to our surprise, on a 747, flying in from China, where they had, not very far away, of course, but it was quite fascinating to see the first two ever Chinese political leaders of this stature to come to Hong Kong. They'd never been here before, of course. Flying on an American aircraft, that's what they have. With them, of course, in this delegation, Tung Chee-hwa, who will be the new chief executive officer in China. Ambassador Lilly, I cut you off, and I apologize while we're trying to look at these pictures. How important do you think America is going to be to Hong Kong now that the British are going to leave?
Well, I think one of the things that Secretary Albright touched on is very important, continuing American naval ship visits after the turnover. And this is a sign of friendship and power. We want to be China's friend, but we are a real factor to deal with in East Asia. Forward deployment is important. We are not containing China. We can be their friend.
Now, as we look at the various officials, there on the left is Tung Chee-hwa. I'm sorry to say I do not know who the Chinese military officer is, but he's clearly very senior. Next to him, Li Peng, the premier, and Jiang Zemin, who is the president. And the foreign minister, Kun Chik-chen, is here, and he is the deputy chairman of the Central Military. Ambassador Lilly, Mrs. Albright is not going to participate in all of the ceremonies this evening, and nor is the British Prime Minister. Do you approve of that when all of America's Asia allies are going to stay on station?
The provisional legislature is something you do not want to bless. They are going to be passing anti-subversion laws right after the takeover. And these laws are by an appointed assembly. It's ruled by law, not of law. And the Chinese in the middle, by the way, is Zhang Wannian, the chief of staff of the People's Liberation Army and the combat commander, 8th Army veteran. He's quite a military figure.
And that's Chen Chi-chen, the foreign minister, who is said to be among the most sophisticated members of the Chinese political leadership. Well, if the United States is going to stay away, Ambassador Lilly, from tonight, and I understand your point of view, why didn't we work harder on the allies out here we're supposed to lead to join us?
Well, I think American leadership is in some question after the most favored nation human rights linkage and a few other things, that people tend to want to do their own thing, including New Zealand, Australia, etc., are very good friends. But the fact that we're going to the swearing in of the new chief executive, I think, is enough. The provisional legislature is not something we want to do, but let other people make their own choices.
Okay, thank you very much. There has indeed been that debate about American leadership here. There is the late, or the former, not the late at all, the former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher and her husband Dennis Thatcher. She was the one who went to see the Chinese in 1982 and discussed perhaps extending the British lease out here. The Chinese said, "You got to be kidding." She came out of the Great Hall of the People and fell down the front steps, and everybody thought that was pretty symbolic about the way the British-Chinese relationship was going to go in the future. And there on the left, the most fascinating local man of all, Tung Chee-hwa. He was a member of the cabinet of the outgoing British governor. He has many American connections. He's an advisor to the Council on Foreign Relations in New York, friend of George Bush, perhaps even of Ambassador Lilly's. Lived in Britain, worked in the U.S. at General Electric. Born in Shanghai. A lot of the political leadership in China today, and indeed some of it in Hong Kong, comes from Shanghai. Tight Shanghai political connections among some of the most senior people. And some people argue that Hong Kong will now have to compete with Shanghai as being the most important economic Chinese city of the future. Mr. Tung Chee-hwa may have been accused of being a poodle by people who thought he was in the tool of Beijing, but he wants to be seen as the man who represents Hong Kong in Beijing. Hong Kong ruled by Hong Kong people. But the whole world will be watching.
联合王国政府共同举行的香港交接仪式。 principal representative.
This, I think, is just preliminary here, so we'll perhaps continue with our observations about the goings-on. Our ABC's David Ensor, who covers the State Department, is with us as well, and has been with Mrs. Albright on her trip out here. They went to Vietnam before they got here. David, let me ask you, what are the insiders saying as to why the U.S. is aligning itself with the colonial power Britain and not hanging out to stay here with the rest of Asia?
Well, Peter, Secretary Albright frequently says and likes to say that the United States should take the right stand, do it with its allies when possible, and stand alone when necessary. And I think that the main consideration has to also be domestic politics. There's not much support in Congress, or the polls show among the American people, for a warm embrace for China. Americans feel very ambivalent about the place, and certainly the Congress does also. Some of the congressmen who are here tonight are also staying away, and in fact they're out there demonstrating with some of the Democrats.
Thank you, David. There are some demonstrations here in Hong Kong this evening. Martin Lee, who's perhaps the best known and the most outspoken Democrat in Hong Kong, who will lose his seat in the legislature tonight when the legislature is dissolved, has made the point that he is going to demonstrate tonight, even if he has to climb up a ladder to the balcony of the legislature here, where the elected executive, or rather the elective constituent body, is going to be replaced by a provisional body. In other words, many of the people who are being defeated are going to be replacing many of the people who are elected. Ted, you were here a short while ago. Ted Koppel is with us from Washington. Ted, you were here a short while ago. You spent time with Tung Chee-hwa. What was your impression of him?
Well, I rather like him. I mean, that's not really relevant whether I like him or not, but I thought he made a lot of sense. One particular point as we watched some of the Chinese military marching into the hall there, one particular thing that he said that made a lot of sense to me, and that is their eye, after all, is on Taiwan. And the point he made to me was, when you think about what we're going to do here in Hong Kong, you may want to keep that in mind. We, after all, do not want to suppress demonstrations here in Hong Kong and then find that when the appropriate time comes, we're not going to be able to negotiate a return of Taiwan to the homeland. That is what the Chinese are looking at in the long run, and I think that speaks well to the future of Hong Kong.
On the two sides of the stage here now, in front of representatives from more than 70 countries. The British to the left, British to the right, Chinese to the left as you look at them, wondering what all of their private thoughts are on this occasion. We know that Governor Chris Patton, who is leaving here tonight with Prince Charles and the Royal Rock Britannia, here with his family. His three girls came back from overseas to be with him tonight. It's been an astonishingly emotional day for him. He is one of those who's been most outspokenly concerned about China. But as David Ensor began to allude, more Americans disapprove of the Chinese coming back here than Hong Kongers do. In other words, the reunification is more favored here. There's Chris Patton right behind the last British military commander there, and there's President Jiang Zemin. This has been carefully, excruciatingly negotiated over many, many months. Who will step here? Who will step there? Who will do what at what second? Enormously long debate about when the flag would come down and when the national anthems would end. Mike Oxenberg, while we're watching this, our Asia scholar, tell us a little quickly about Jiang Zemin. Mike Oxenberg is with us. Can you hear me? Can you give us a brief thumbnail sketch of Jiang Zemin?
Yes, Jiang Zemin, 70 years of age now, is a first leader of China who is a technocrat, graduated from university, trained then in Eastern Europe, and essentially served as a bureaucrat in China's industrial ministries, and then found himself as the leader of Shanghai during that tumultuous 1989 period. And he managed the unrest in 1989 better, and Deng Xiaoping brought him to Beijing to be the leader.
Mike?
Yeah.
The Chinese national
I've wrapped up.
Prince Charles, the British Prime Minister, the British Foreign Secretary, the last British Governor, the last British Commander.
His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales.
现在，请威尔斯亲王殿下讲话。
Charles, who was at one time considered as the governor of Hong Kong, making his final remarks.
President Jiang Zemin, Premier Li Peng, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This important and special ceremony marks a moment of both change and continuity in Hong Kong's history. It marks, first of all, the restoration of Hong Kong to the People's Republic of China under the terms of the Sino-British Joint Declaration of 1984, after more than 150 years of British administration. This ceremony also celebrates continuity because by that same treaty and the many subsequent agreements which have been made to implement its provisions, the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region will have its own government and retain its own society, its own economy, and its own way of life. I should like to pay tribute this evening to those who turned the concept of one country, two systems into the joint declaration, and to the dedication and commitment of those who have worked so hard over the last 13 years to negotiate the details of the joint declaration's implementation. But most of all, I should like to pay tribute to the people of Hong Kong themselves for all that they have achieved in the last century and a half. The triumphant success of Hong Kong demands and deserves to be maintained. Hong Kong has shown the world how dynamism and stability can be defining characteristics of a successful society. These have together created a great economy which is the envy of the world. Hong Kong has shown the world how East and West can live and work together. As a flourishing commercial and cultural crossroads, it has brought us together and enriched all our lives. 13 years ago, the governments of the United Kingdom and the People's Republic of China recognized in the joint declaration that these special elements which had created the crucial conditions for Hong Kong's success should continue. They agreed that in order to maintain that success, Hong Kong should have its own separate trading and financial systems, should enjoy autonomy and an elected legislature, should maintain its laws and liberties, and should be run by the people of Hong Kong and be accountable to them. Those special elements have served Hong Kong well over the past 2 decades. Hong Kong has coped with the challenges of great economic, social, and political transition with almost none of the disturbance and dislocation which in other parts of the world have so often accompanied change on such a scale. The United Kingdom has been proud and privileged to have had responsibility for the people of Hong Kong, to have provided a framework of opportunity in which Hong Kong has so conspicuously succeeded, and to have been part of the success which the people of Hong Kong have made of their own opportunities. In a few moments, the United Kingdom's responsibilities will pass to the People's Republic of China. Hong Kong will thereby be restored to China, and within the framework of one country, two systems, it will continue to have a strong identity of its own and be an important international partner for many countries in the world. Ladies and gentlemen, China will tonight take responsibility for a place and a people which matter greatly to us all. The solemn pledges made before the world in the 1984 Joint Declaration guarantee the continuity of Hong Kong's way of life. For its part, the United Kingdom will maintain its unwavering support for the Joint Declaration. Our commitment and our strong links to Hong Kong will continue and will, I am confident, flourish as Hong Kong and its people themselves continue to flourish. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I should like, on behalf of Her Majesty the Queen and of the entire British people, to express our thanks, admiration, affection, and good wishes to all the people of Hong Kong who have been such staunch and special friends over so many generations. We shall not forget you, and we shall watch with the closest interest as you embark on this new era of your remarkable history.
Prince Charles speaking on behalf of the Queen. The flag ceremony, the announcer said casually, but it is so rich in symbolism. The British flag, representing England and Ireland and Scotland. The Hong Kong flag on the right. The Chinese flag, the great red background representing the international proletarian revolution. That big gold star representing the Communist Party. And as you'll see when it's flying, there you are on the left, the four smaller gold yellow stars representing the four classes of Chinese society. The workers, the peasants, the bourgeoisie, and what the Chinese call the patriotic capitalists. Representatives of the British Air Force, the Navy, and on the right, the Black Watch, the same Highland regiment that said goodbye to Britain on Britain's behalf to India 50 years ago. The Hong Kong police. It is the Hong Kong police who shall be the keepers, the guardians of law and order here in Hong Kong, according to the basic law agreed to by China and Britain. Hong Kong will be, the agreement says, responsible for its own affairs. There was once a time, we've said it before, when the British flag flew over 800 million people in the world. Today,
The Union flag and the
British
Hong Kong
dependents,
flag will now be
180,000.
And the national flag of the People's Republic of China and the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region flag will be raised.
现在将联合王国国旗和香港旗升中华人民共和国国旗和香港特别行政区区旗。
Well, that will resonate for a few million people throughout the world. Resonate with more than 1 billion people throughout the world, and will send chills up and down the spines, both positive and negative, for people all over the world. There on the left, the Bohemia, the official flower of Hong Kong, which now becomes the Hong Kong flag, replacing the colonial crest on all sorts of things here, such as the badges of immigration officials. Ironically, the real name of that flower is Bohemia Blakeiana, named after a British colonial governor, Sir Henry Blake. And for the British, which at its peak saw its flag fly over more than 56 countries and numerous other islands, remind us that much of this began when the first British representative to China, there's the last, refused to kowtow to the Chinese emperor. To kowtow in Chinese, to bow his head. Governor Chris Patton leaves here a more popular, considerably more popular figure than the incoming chief executive. He said in his farewell appearance before the legislature, "I could have had a better relationship with China if I'd done what they wanted. But the price would have been to sell out Hong Kong." He has his critics, but he has many more admirers as he leaves to go to France to write a book about his experiences here, taking with him his dogs, brandy and soda, whiskey and soda, and his wife, Lavender.
坐下。现在
And now we will hear from the Chinese President Jiang Zemin.
His Excellency, Mr. Jiang
Arrived
Zemin,
here
President of the People's Republic
just a short
of
while
China,
ago, and
will now speak.
Chinese tradition applauds his audience as they applaud him. A man who's widely regarded as the man who is the key to continuing modernization and reform.
Distinguished Prince Charles, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. This is a solemn occasion. At this time, the flag of the HKSAR has been raised. At this time, the peoples of the countries of the world have their eyes cast on Hong Kong. Based on the joint declaration between Britain and China, the two governments have started on time the ceremony for the handover. The official establishment of the HKSAR is an important event for the people of China and also the victory for all peoples of the world. In 1997 and the 1st of July will come down in history as a red letter day of our peoples. Hong Kong's return to China marks the Hong Kong compatriots will from now on become the real masters of this piece of land. Hong Kong's development will enter a brand new era. History will remember Mr. Deng Xiaoping, who came up with the creative philosophy of one country, two systems. Therefore, in accordance with this policy of one country, two systems, we have successfully resolved the question of Hong Kong and successfully returned Hong Kong to China. At this solemn occasion, to Britain, to British and China individuals who have contributed to the resolution of the question of Hong Kong, and to all those in the world who are concerned with and support the return of Hong Kong, I wish to express to them my heartfelt thanks. This solemn occasion at this time, I would like to say to the 6.5 million Hong Kong compatriots who are returning to the embrace of our motherland, I wish to express to them my best wishes at this time. After Hong Kong's return, the Chinese government will steadfastly implement the policy of one country, two systems, Hong Kong people running Hong Kong, and a high degree of autonomy for Hong Kong, and retain Hong Kong's original economic and social systems and way of life. The legal system will basically not be changed. After the return of Hong Kong, the Central People's Government will be responsible for Hong Kong's foreign affairs and defense. The HKSAR, in accordance with the basic law, has administrative, legislative, and judicial powers and final appeal. According to law, Hong Kong people enjoys rights and freedoms, and the HKSAR will continue to develop, and will develop its own democratic system appropriate to it. It will continue to maintain its position as a free port and continue to play its role as an international financial, trade, and shipping center, and continue with all the countries of the world and the relevant international organizations to establish cultural and economic ties. All countries and regions in its legitimate economic interests will be appropriately protected under the law. I hope that those countries that have investments in economic interests in Hong Kong will continue to promote Hong Kong's stability and prosperity. The people of Hong Kong have a glorious patriotic tradition. Hong Kong's prosperity today, first and foremost, was created by the Hong Kong compatriots and also cannot be separated from China's support and cooperation. So with China as a strong shield behind it, the HKSAR government and the Hong Kong compatriots, I'm sure that they will be able to administer and construct Hong Kong and maintain Hong Kong's long-term stability and prosperity and create an even better future for Hong Kong. Thank you very much.
President Jiang Zemin in the convention center here in Hong Kong, and you're taking a quick look at Tiananmen Square as well. He, the president, looking much more sprightly than when he got off the aircraft earlier today. This picture, of course, is one that evokes enormously powerful sentiments for people all over the world. There's the Great Hall of the People over there. This was where on that horrendous night of June the 4th, 1989, the People's Liberation Army fired on its own people, affecting people throughout the world, but affecting the Chinese as much as anything else, who had grown up believing that the Chinese army was in the service of the people. And if ever there was a day in which the Chinese people discovered that the People's Liberation Army was in the service of the political leadership, that was the day. And now the PLA, the army, is one of the largest investors in Hong Kong, having been told recently to scale down its numbers and pay for itself in many respects. And so much of this business development that China is involved in here in Hong Kong and the new economic zones in China deeply involves the PLA. All those invited guests there in Tiananmen Square tonight from all over China, with the probable exception of Tibet, which has been closed to foreigners in the last couple of days. Tibet striving for its independence in the face of oppression by the Chinese government. And though the mainland Chinese and the Taiwanese and the Hong Kongers all do business together, they will be and are looking at this evening with apprehension on the island of Taiwan. Tempted to just speculate a little whether Prince Charles always intended to wear a civilian suit for this occasion. Pretty sure he did, but if he'd wanted to continue wearing his naval uniform, he'd have had to get it dried in a big hurry. Prince Charles and Chris Patton, the British governor, will now go to the Royal Yacht Britannia for what will undeniably be one of the great photographs of the latter part of this century, as the Royal Yacht Britannia leaves Victoria Harbor and goes off into the South China Sea. Next stop, Manila. British Prime Minister Tony Blair, you see walking out of the room there. He has no intention, along with the Secretary of State Madeleine Albright, of staying for the next portion of this handover ceremony, because what will happen is that the Provisional Legislature, by the way, we're in China now, in case anybody's interested. It's 10 minutes after 12 out here in Hong Kong. And in the second part of this handover ceremony, the Provisional Legislature will be sworn in, as will the Chief Executive Officer for Hong Kong, Tung Chee-hwa, and both Mrs. Albright, in the name of the Clinton administration, and the British Prime Minister, Mr. Blair, do not wish to be seen as giving any affirmation, any endorsement to something which they believe is not only contrary to democratic process, but is not required under the agreement between Britain and China. Everybody else will stay here. Deborah Wong is in Tiananmen Square, and I hope she can hear me. Deborah, as the hour passed, observations? trying to contact Deborah Wong, ABC's Deborah Wong in Tiananmen Square. Deborah, as the hour came, how was it?
Well, people got out of their seats as the clock ticked down, and when the Union Jack was lowered and the Chinese flags were raised, there was a lot of cheering both times. This was a very big event here. A lot of clapping, a lot of smiles all around. There were no tears shed here. If there were any, they were all tears of joy. People here are very excited. They've gone back now to the performances. They will cross over live again to Hong Kong when the new governor and the provisional legislature is sworn in. But right now, it's back to the partying.
And look at Hong Kong. Look at Hong Kong, leaving the convention center. This is what all of Hong Kong looks like. It is quite stunning. Many of my colleagues on this broadcast tonight have much, much more experience here than I do, but this is extraordinarily modern. And in this convention center, which has just been recently finished, designed by an American architect, you see again this extraordinary manifestation of modernity and progress and money. This vast escalator being brought into service so that Prince Charles and Governor Patton can, quite frankly, get out of there in a hurry and onto the Royal Yacht Britannia. It's over when it's over, and it's over, and off they go. Prince Charles has spent a lot of time in Hong Kong over the years. One presumes he will come back again because British trading interests here, the Hongs, as they were originally called, the British trading groups. It is even suspected that some of the British firms here will do even better, partly because their stock prices have been suppressed recently because the hot stocks in town are some of the new mainland Chinese stocks which have been floated on the Hong Kong Stock Exchange. But of course it was British trade in opium that brought Britain here almost 200 years ago. The Prince will leave, as I said, with Governor Chris Patton, who's came out here as the 28th and last governor here, and nobody knew quite what to expect. British are getting an awful lot of credit in recent days for having given the Hong Kongers a degree of democracy they didn't have before. That's Tung Chee-hwa, the chief executive, saying goodbye to the Prince of Wales and to Chris Patton, the governor, and to the British foreign minister. But it's only recently that the British have really given Hong Kong an additional measure of democracy. For the vast portion of their time here, they were a colonial power, and they are criticized by many for having waited so long, and many of the ethnic Chinese here who are glad to be reunited with the mainland speak very openly about having been the subjects of a colonial power for so long. This beautiful convention center, reminding some people of the Sydney Opera House, at least in its proximity to the water, has just got open, but will clearly now become one of Asia's great landmarks. Mike Oxenberg, our Asia scholar from Stanford University. This building, by the way, as you look at it now, is pointing north to the mainland, to China, which from Hong Kong point of view and from China's is the future. And the American architect, Larry Oltmans, goes around town saying, yes, indeed, he does know the Prince of Wales' views on architecture. Prince of Wales is very critical of modern architecture in Britain. Mike Oxenberg, that was really something.
Yes, it was, Peter. Did he hear me? Peter?
Go ahead, I'm listening to you, Mike.
Oh, good. Okay. Peter, I couldn't help but think on those shots from Tiananmen Square that at the south end of the square is the mausoleum of Mao Zedong, the man who helped found the People's Republic of China, ruled it as a tyrant until 1976. I couldn't help but think, what would he have thought on this occasion? And could he have ever mastered a takeover of Hong Kong as the Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin era has engineered. He,
well, certainly not in
I
this
think,
way,
would
I
have
think
been
you
feared.
presume.
That's right, and I think that he also would have been very apprehensive about the influx of influence from Hong Kong into Guangdong province just north of here and then into China as a whole, bringing ideas from the outside that really are eroding many of the principles that he attempted to inculcate in his lifetime.
I must tell you, Mike, thank you very much, that in Hong Kong today, Mao Zedong is probably most widely visible on the face of a cheap watch. And in his famous pose with his arm extended, now representing the second hand, he is part of the extraordinary kitsch. If you look very quickly now back in the convention center, I think you can see the governor's wife hustling out rather quickly there, a little late in catching up to her husband. But there's a lot of kitsch around town, and certainly Mao Zedong's face on a watch is as kitschy as it comes these days. We'll be right back to watch the Royal Yacht Britannia sail into the South China Sea.
The Hong Kong handover continues from Hong Kong. Once again, Peter Jennings.
Well, as we make our way out of this convention hall and down to the water's edge, there's the Royal Rolls-Royce. Do you know there are more Rolls-Royces sold in Hong Kong than anywhere else in the world? And there's more cognac drunk in Hong Kong than anywhere else in the world. That's what made me think of brandy and soda, the governor's dogs, earlier on, rather than whiskey and soda. This is an astonishingly rich place, and people wear their wealth on their sleeves and in their automobiles and in their houses. There are houses on the top of the mountains overlooking this fabulous harbor and the Royal Yacht Britannia tonight, which they're tearing down, even though they're worth $90 million. $90 million, because they're going to put up 5 houses in its place and sell them for $125 million. And Mike Oxenberg, our resident, thank goodness, our resident China analyst, talking about the adjacent Chinese province of Guangdong, which is only 45 minutes away by train. The most astonishingly progressive province in China, at least economically. People trying to flock there from all over that vast nation to join the export drive. At home, we all know what it means to go into our local department store and look at the labels and see made in China. And by the way, that's such a sensitive political issue for many people that out here they're taking the made in China label off and putting on made by Chinese, so as to perhaps presume that it was made in Hong Kong. But Mike Oxenberg is referring to the economic and financial drive that this city is going to have on China. It's why people often talk about the possibility that this tiny place, 435 square miles, could have an effect on China. And he also points out, as do others, that no country has done as much for its people in the last 10 years as China has done, even though Tiananmen Square remains as this bloodstain on its modern history for so many Chinese and for so much of the rest of the world. It is sad, of course, that many people in China tonight will not be seeing this as the rest of us in the rest of the world has seen it. And we may even miss the Royal Yacht going off into the darkness on this particular broadcast, but we'll certainly have it on World News Tonight. But there's the last procession by the British royal family and the last governor of Hong Kong. There were 28 British governors here. They came here when this was a rocky, barren place. The London Parliament didn't even think much of it. In the days when Britain was stuffing opium down the throats of the Chinese, opium grown in the English colony of India for sale to the Chinese to get silver in return. No wonder the Chinese have felt as they have done on that score for 150 years. And there's the Royal Yacht Britannia, again commissioned in, 1953 by Queen Elizabeth. That's going to be scrapped or sold or put into mothballs very shortly because the British can no longer afford to keep it. Costs $18 million a year. But those are the small details of the end of empire and the rising tide of the new empire. So important to us in the United States because how China and the United States now get along, how the Chinese treat Hong Kong, how we react to that is going to define the really powerful relationships in Asia in the next century. If we have an adversarial relationship with China, then it's going to be rough out here. If not, then it is very possible that it will be progress for everybody, and as Chinese all over the world hope as well as the rest of us, one day perhaps even democracy in China, as there is a measure of such in Hong Kong today. A lot of talk about colonialism these days. Was it good or bad for the world? It was probably both. But let us leave you with some of the images of this former British Crown colony, now China. I'm Peter Jennings. Thank you for joining us. Good night from Hong Kong.
Republic of China is a sovereign state. We were founded in 1912, and we have been in existence for the past 86 years. We're also a democratic country with a government democratically elected. So we must be held accountable to the public will of the people. And thirdly, we are also a country that has maintained and established a wide international presence. And also, we have enough deterrent military capabilities to safeguard our own security and sovereignty. So it's entirely different case. But in the guidelines for national reunification drafted in 1991, we have provided 3 different phases for the eventual reunification. We believe that mutual and reciprocal exchanges between the two sides will lead to mutual trust and cooperation. That will in turn bring consultation and eventual political reunification. In other words,
Mr. Vice President,
we believe, yes.
Please continue that thought.
Yes, we believe that reunification should be realized not only as a territorial or jurisdictional unification. It should be something more than that. The country should be reunified under the principle of freedom, democracy, and prosperity. So, in other words, we adhere to the principle of one country with a good system of government, not one country with 2 systems.
If I could just ask you to pause for a moment, Mr. Vice President. To our CNN domestic viewers, we say thank you for joining our coverage. We're going to be here for many, many hours to come. We salute you as you depart and go back. And continuing our interview at the East Timor Naval Base here in Hong Kong on the waterfront, the Prince of Wales has arrived with the British delegation, and he will be piped aboard the Royal Yacht Britannia, and they will be departing very, very shortly, headed for the Philippines. We're talking with the Vice President of Taiwan, sir, and I just heard you say that freedom and democracy and prosperity are important to you. You believe in one system, one country, not one country and 2 systems. In essence,
that's right.
To really condense every point you've made over the past 4 minutes, are you in effect saying reunification never?
Well, it will come only after gradual and sequential processes. We will start building up mutual trust and cooperation. then it will lead to political consultation and eventually national reunification. It is a process that we have to be patient.
Well, you're mentioning patience. You say you've got to go through 3 different phases: mutual, reciprocity, building up trust, cooperation, consultation. But I hear you saying that China will have to change before Taiwan changes.
Well, the fact is that we're not looking only for territorial or jurisdictional reunification. That is important, but that is not all. We believe all people should live under a free system, a democratic system. Nobody here on this island will voluntarily accept communism as a system of society or as a system of government.
This has been a CNN Live event. Today,
we are and how much support we have, towards, Hong Kong return to China. And we also want to tell the British, okay, this is a very, this is the greatest moment because, we can end the colonialist control in an extreme civilized manner.
I'm delighted that I'm seeing the celebration and seeing that there's people standing up for the Hong Kong-China unification again, because the British drug dealers took Hong Kong away from us, and the British government really pushed this issue about what's going to happen, and so I guess it's time for Chinese to be ready to take Hong Kong.
There is an overwhelming sense of pride here, an overwhelming sense of support. The young and the old. I spoke with a young girl who was about 13 years old earlier today. She's never been to China, never been to Hong Kong, but she certainly feels as though there is that connection. And then a lot of older people were here as well. And some of those older people who perhaps lived in China or lived in Hong Kong at one time feel the connection, feel the unification, and feel that their homeland is now completely united. And that's it from here, Jody. All right, Odetta Rogers-Clark on the streets of Chinatown in New York, and I don't know if our camera can get it here or not, but a spontaneous display of celebration here in Hong Kong. We're right next to the, is that the Space Museum next to us, David?
Right. It's the planetarium, and there's a fountain all around it.
And a bunch of young people dancing around in the water
right.
and jumping and hugging each other.
Splashing their way through.
Okay, so that's what's happening here in Hong Kong. We are going to take a short break from our MSNBC coverage, but we will be right back with more live from Hong Kong right after this. Us earlier, now it's just blowing us around, but we will survive. We're joined now by Eden Woon with the Hong Kong Chamber of Commerce. He is the first non-British director of the Hong Kong Chamber since its founding in 1861. He's an American citizen of Chinese descent and served for 5 years as the China Policy Advisor in the Pentagon. Thank you very much for being with us, sir. We appreciate your time this evening. We're sure you have a lot to do, like a lot of people do on this momentous occasion. Let me start by asking you what you tell jittery business people who might love doing business in Hong Kong but might have their concerns now about changes here politically and socially. What do you tell them to allay their fears?
Well, what I tell them is that the international companies which are based here are extremely optimistic about the future. Recent surveys of both American and British companies have seen 95% and above confidence in business in Hong Kong, and plans to either stay or expand their presence here in Hong Kong. And the Hong Kong companies here are extremely excited about the prospect of being able to be more integrated with the Chinese economy, and they're optimistic about the growth of the Chinese economy, and that is going to help the growth of the Hong Kong economy too.
What do you think of the decision on the part of Britain and the U.S. to essentially boycott the swearing in of the new legislature? No high-level officials going to be attending that. Do you think that's a good way for them to handle the situation?
Well, I don't want to comment on their motivation, but I'm sure that they have their own views about the provisional legislature, which of course is a dispute between the British and the Chinese, and is a result of some disagreement over the election of 1995. And this disagreement is what caused the creation of the provisional legislature, which is considered actually unfortunate by all sides. That's the political decision they want to make, and I don't really have any comment on that.
I've heard it said that Hong Kong is going to have a bigger challenge managing relations with Washington than it will have managing relations with Beijing. Do you think that's true?
I think that is true because, U.S.-China relationship is not good at this point, and I personally don't see any turnaround within the near future. And so as long as these two countries have a strained relationship, Hong Kong, unfortunately, will always be caught in the middle. And whatever happens in Hong Kong, some of them could be totally independent of what Beijing may do, would be looked at very carefully by Washington, D.C. And unfortunately, what that means is that Hong Kong may suffer as a result of the poor relationship between the two countries. But having said that, I think that Hong Kong people will persevere, and the economy should grow, and so business-wise, the Hong Kong's future should remain steady.
Eden Woon with the Hong Kong Chamber of Commerce, thank you very much for joining us, sir. And please stay tuned to MSNBC for more coverage throughout the afternoon of events here in Hong Kong. But right now, we send you back to our studio.